Shut up and sit down.
Welcome, everybody. We are here today on a mission. I usually decide with Karen what our weekly call is going to be on Mondays, and we talked for a while, decided on our thing, and then got off the phone and emailed each other and go, yeah, scrap all that. We're doing gun control this week. So welcome to the show. I'm Natasha.
I'm Karen. This is the International Man of Mystery.
Hello.
And I'm Cheryl.
Cheryl, yay.
Hi.
International Man of Mystery. We just call him Im. So that's going to be his name. So obviously gun control is the issue this week because of the horrific shooting that took place in Vegas over the weekend. It was the largest shooting in modern U.S. history. And I actually am tangentially in touch with somebody whose wife was killed. He has a 2-year-old daughter, and they were all there together at the festival.
Oh, my God.
So this is something that I feel like we are able to distance ourselves from a lot when things like this happen. And because it happens so often, it's getting to the point where a lot of us can't anymore. It's getting closer and closer to all of us as time goes on and more people experience things like this. And I had a friend who was visiting from Australia, and she had made a special group on Facebook for all of her friends who were American to share pictures, and she had created a to-do list, things to do in America. And the things on her list were things like look at a squirrel, eat Taco Bell. She was staying in the hotel across the street from the shooting when it happened.
Wow.
I mean, it's incredibly fucked up to say that is a very American thing that she experienced. That is something that we are unfortunately starting to be known for. I mean, it's sort of a weird cliche in other countries that Americans all walk around strapping.
Is that true? Do you think that?
Yes. Yeah. That's what people think.
Have you shot guns every time you've gone to America?
Yes.
Aha. That's something I never thought of, like gun tourism. I think that my Australian friend shot guns while she was here also, now that you bring that up.
It's a huge amount of fun, though. It doesn't mean it should be allowed. There are lots of things that are fun that are illegal.
Until we change that. Look at that. So we know that it's horrible, and I think you've just made that impact clear. And we decided we were going to try to be a little more hopeful today so that none of us had to cry.
Yes, so sorry about that if I made people cry. Hopefully, you know.
Because it's terrible.
But there were a couple of different bills on the table that we were looking at. One of them was regarding deregulation of silencers. And from my understanding, this was part of the SHARE Act, which, oh my God, now I've forgotten his name, has tabled for the moment.
Paul Ryan.
Thank you, Paul Ryan. I can picture his face as he's holding a weight and posing for the camera.
Yeah. I know you were just blocking.
Right, probably exactly what's happening. And my brain needs to take care of itself sometimes.
If it's talk about Paul Ryan, it might be.
So the ones that we were planning on focusing on, and if you again get the broadcast newsletter, are the Dickey Amendment, which is a rider that mandated that none of the funds made available for injury prevention and control at the CDC may be used to advocate or promote gun control.
That's from 1996, so we have not been researching the impact of gun violence since then. Right, so we cannot even research it
Whereas we've been able to research things like safety in cars to make it safer to drive a car, but we can't research gun violence.
Yeah, this is something that I keep seeing people talking about, how now is not the time to politicize things. And I'm like, when exactly do you bring this up? Do we start changing like food regulations when there's an outbreak of mad cow disease? Yeah, we do. Like, that's exactly when we should start discussing this.
Do we not talk about the emergency response to a hurricane?
Exactly.
Well, and the only thought is, if now is not the time, are we going to wait until there's 60 people that are killed in one shooting? Do we have to break 100 for people to get killed in a shooting to make it a political issue?
Well, I think after Newtown, it's pretty clear that there is no number. Because, kids should count.
I mean, the best analogy is actually with terrorism. So every time there's a major terrorist act when multiple people are killed, the first thing you do is look at how it happened and how you could prevent it happening again next time. So after 9/11, there was a massive activity, laws passed to try and prevent that kind of thing happening again. And it happens with all sorts of terrorist acts. So why doesn't it happen with something like this, which is far worse than most?
After the shoe bomber, we all got to take our shoes off at airports.
That's right.
Yeah.
Still, how long was that? And it was one guy did that.
One guy.
And he didn't even succeed.
Right.
Yeah, this is the kind of thing that I feel like is really misunderstood, because the impact that people think it's going to make is that everybody's getting their guns taken away. We're going door to door, searching your house, taking every weapon, and leaving you completely defenseless and helpless. No, gun control is not about simply a ban on guns. It's about making sure that there are background checks. It's about making sure that people don't have access to military grade automatic weapons.
Or
ammunition, which is, I think, is that in Switzerland? You are allowed to have weapons, but the ammunition sales are highly regulated.
Yeah. And then in the event of war, they distribute ammunition, and all of a sudden you've got an army.
Ooh.
But that's known as a cop killer should not be allowed.
Right. Obviously. I think that's common sense. So after Obama is going to take our guns and all of that fear mongering, the common response to a gun tragedy is an increase in the purchase of guns because they're afraid they're going to take them away. And so all the gun stocks went up like 4% after the shooting.
Yep.
But it's worth remembering as well. I saw a chart today that mass shooting events like this one, even though they're really tragic, are a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of the actual number of deaths. So there were 11,000 gun-related homicides in the US last year, whereas there were a few hundred people killed in mass shootings. So that's going on every single day after day after day, and that's what should be putting the pressure. These events tend to attract attention, and then it all dies away. But it needs to be constant pressure from all of those thousands of people dying every year.
And remember, too, we have almost 10 times as many people who were wounded. So you don't know how intense those wounds were and how life-changing they were. So it's not necessarily that all those people are just that section that's gone. It's the larger population whose lives have been devastated.
There's also an ongoing psychological effect after living through something like that, which I just can't imagine. And the kind of trauma that you have to deal with and cope with in being in crowds after something like that.
All right, so then we're going to make me cry.
What's that?
You're going to make me cry. So let's talk about the pressure and the ways to make it better, because we all know, I think, how terrible it is.
So the 5 Calls has a couple of different options right now. They have the demand action against gun violence in general, which is the script that I put into the newsletter this time. And it has bullet points: closing the loophole that lets people buy guns at shows through private sellers without background checks. Seems very reasonable. Instituting universal background checks for ammo and gun buyers, and measure 80% of gun owners support, which is a really important statistic there. Because that's, again, something that I feel like a lot of people who you talk to who are going to, like, when you get down to it, brass tacks, and get past the frightening words gun control and present people with what you mean, a lot of people realize that they actually agree with the common sense basics of screening, but it's just it's sort of like when you talk about socialized medicine and everybody's like, what? But then you're like, well, no, just that you're covered and you don't die if you get cancer. And they're like, oh, well, yeah, actually that seems like a good idea. And removing the Dickey rider from the federal budget, allowing the CDC to research gun violence protection or prevention, funding evidence-based community anti-violence programs like Ceasefire, which have been shown to reduce shootings. And this is an interesting thing that Karen sent me an article on. Ceasefire is a community-based project where they really got into like offering help to the community that was suffering from increased gun violence. And when they offered this and reached out to people and tried to help, they saw the youth gun related violence drop by like 68%.
Wow.
But when they tried to get more funding for it from the Obama administration, they were rebuffed despite having pretty like amazing results. So I think that would be an excellent way to spend our money, and I just think when there's a lot of pushback against the idea of regulating guns, there's always this comparison between like knives, like, oh, you're going to outlaw knives. And it's like,
yes,
if you want to show me a knife that can kill 50 people from 1,200 yards away, then maybe I will. Right? Like, but I really believe that there is something about how easy it is to take a life with a gun in the heat of a moment that isn't replicable with a knife. You're just not going to have that sudden impulse of just bam over a ridiculous fight in the street. And
so you recently had a terrorism incident involving a knife in London.
Yes. So we had a car full of very determined terrorists in London who crashed their car through a crowd of people, then stormed out of the car and started stabbing people indiscriminately. And they killed, how many people did they kill? It was 2 or 3?
Yeah, I was going to say 4.
And they wounded quite a lot, but they killed 2 or 3 people and they were then shot dead by the police within, I think, about 3 minutes. But it goes to show the difference there. You have dedicated murderers who are setting out to murder as many people as possible, armed with knives, and they kill a handful of people at best. If they'd have had automatic weapons in London, which is a very crowded place, this was a crowded Saturday night, they'd have killed dozens upon dozens of people. And that's the difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that, like, we keep using the word reasonable. That's the only word I feel like that really applies here. We are not asking for the world. We're asking for really basic protections that seem like common sense.
Yeah.
So.
All right. So your ceasefire is hopeful and the reduction. I looked up what happened in Australia because that's a common example of like what you can do. So in 1996, they had a massacre in Port Arthur. Somebody opened fire in Tasmania and killed 35 people and wounded 23. So very much what we're used to here. But that was the worst mass murder in Australia's history. So 12 days later, they had come up with a bipartisan agreement to change the gun laws. The new laws, which are still on the books, prohibit private sales of guns, require weapons to be individually registered to their owners so that if you, they know whose gun it is, and then require the gun buyers to present a genuine reason for needing a gun, and just self-defense is not enough. And the public supported that move because they were raw from the tragedy. The results are, within 10 years after that, homicides had plunged 59%, which is not unlike the number you gave us, Natasha, for your fire. Suicides dropped 65%. And there was no corresponding increase in non-firearm related homicides. So it's not like then people started using knives. That's not what happens. Robberies involving firearms dropped significantly, but home invasions did not increase. So you don't need a gun to deter home invasion. That's not true either. And then in the decade before the massacre, they had 11 mass shootings, and they have not had a single one since. So you can all right. So we have a Second Amendment. We've interpreted it to mean everybody can own a gun. Okay. Can we make that sort of reform compatible with our Constitution. Most of that, except maybe the genuine reason part, where you have to have a reason to have a gun. So if we don't do that, but the rest of it, yeah, you can make that work, I think, with the Constitution. So, like, it's possible that we could get somewhere where we're not having these. So I right now, I'm not feeling like giving up. I'm feeling like calling and demanding change.
Yeah. You know, and the last time that this whole scenario in Australia came up that I read about it, one thing I remember reading was there were politicians who said, this could be a career-limiting move for me as a politician. I don't care. It has to be done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's a saving lives move.
I don't care.
Stephen to join us to tell us about what the laws are in Britain and what the results are, because I thought that might give another example.
So I thought I'd give you a quick history of gun control in the UK, and then tell you some stuff about the situation as it is at the moment, really. And as I tell you, you should bear in mind that we consider that we have a problem with gun violence, and there are all sorts of different special police task forces set up to tackle the problem. So there's a long history of legislation to restrict gun control. So it started really in 1584. When Queen Elizabeth I banned completely possession of flintlock pistols after one was used to assassinate William of Orange. And she was then terrified that this newfangled weapon would be used to kill her. So she banned them. It didn't last very long, though. And before long, guns were creeping back. And in fact, the Bill of Rights in 1689 enacted the inalienable right of all Protestants to bear arms. Not Catholics, only Protestants, because you don't want an armed Catholic.
Oh, good God.
And this was our inalienable right set in our Bill of Rights. Now, luckily,
that's interesting.
We don't have a constitution. And so the fact that it was in the Bill of Rights really didn't form any kind of obstacle to centuries and centuries of further gun control. The next major act really was in 1824, the Vagrancy Act. Funnily enough, this was just after the Napoleonic Wars, and apparently the country was filled with people wandering the streets armed with weaponry that they brought back. And the government was quite worried about this because they were vagrants because they were soldiers, and so they banned or they restricted possession of pistols, cutlasses, and other bludgeons. And unfortunately, the restriction wasn't very effective because basically you had to have a license and you could just go and buy a license. So people just went and bought licenses. Then more up to date, in 1903, the Pistols Act was the first act that really restricted the sales of pistols without a license. So to get a pistol, then you had to have a license, but you also, or to show that you were going abroad for more than 3 months. You were then allowed to be armed because obviously a British man abroad in the wilds of foreign countries needed his weaponry with him. But again, it was very easy to buy the license. The first real act that restricted weapons seriously was in 1920, the Firearm Act of 1920. Now, this was after the First World War, when the government was feared actually that there was going to be a revolution because the populace were really upset about the war. And there's also obviously ongoing conflict in Ireland fighting for its independence, which again was destabilizing the country. There were quite a lot of restrictions put on guns then. And that really was the last piece of major legislation up until the 1980s. So even though there were restrictions on gun ownership, it was still actually fairly easy to own a gun until 1987. There were two key events really in British history that meant that we limited gun control. In 1987, Michael Ryan wandered around the small town of Hungerford in Bedfordshire and killed 16 people using a variety of handguns and semi-automatic rifles. I remember this event, and it was a terrible event that really sort of hit the whole country because no one could believe that such a terrible thing could happen. So within a few months, there was the Firearms Amendment Act of 1988, which banned completely semi-automatic rifles and restricted shotguns. And then, about 10 years later, we had the Dunblane Massacre. In 1997, Thomas Hamilton he went into a primary school in Dunblane in Scotland and shot dead 16 children and a teacher before turning his gun on himself. And he had for legally owned handguns. Following that, that's still actually the deadliest mass shooting in UK history. Following that, there were a variety of inquiries, there were reports, and the government basically there was an election coming up. So the various parties were scrambling with each other to see who could enact the strictest gun control laws. And so in 1997, the Major government enacted the Firearm Amendment Act, which banned all cartridge ammunition handguns. And so all pistols basically were completely banned, and more restrictions were placed on the possession of rifles and shotguns. There was an exception though, which was you were allowed to have, for some reason, .22 single shot pistols. So when the Blair government was elected in 1997, the very first thing they did was to enact another amendment to that act, which also banned .22 pistols. So from that point on, handguns have been completely banned in the UK.
What year was that again?
1997.
Okay.
And it makes us actually the country with one of the strictest gun control laws in the world. This was a problem actually for our Olympic shooting team. So they had to actually make a special dispensation for the Olympic shooting team to be allowed to have guns, but only in several carefully concealed locations around the country are the guns actually allowed to be kept, and they're allowed to go and shoot there. So they have to travel to these special places. For the 2012 Olympics, they had to make another exception and pass a special law to allow competitors to have handguns so they could actually compete in the shooting events. So we have the strictest laws in the world. The law at the moment basically states the only guns you're allowed to own are shotguns and rifles. To get one, you need a license, and it's extremely difficult to get a license. It's similar to Australia. You have to prove that you need the gun, and the only real reasons why you might need it are for if you're a farmer and you need a shotgun to shoot squirrels or whatever, or if you're a sportsman and you're rifle shooting for sport. Again, self-defense isn't a viable option. In fact, you're not allowed to use firearms for self-defense in this country. There was a famous case actually where a farmer shot a burglar and killed him and was actually put on trial for murder. I think he did eventually get acquitted, but it was a really big case at the time with this argument about whether you're actually allowed to shoot people in self-defense. So if you do have a gun and you don't have a permit for it, then the laws are extremely strict. So there's a minimum 5-year prison sentence for possession of a handgun, up to a maximum 14 years. Obviously, if you use that handgun to commit a crime, then the penalties go up from there. They get tacked on. So you get the bank robbery crime on top of the actual 14 years you get for possession of a handgun. So the laws are so onerous that criminals, it's just not worthwhile criminals having guns. Because if they get stopped on the street, casual stop and search, you're in prison for at least 5 years. And there's no real leeway there. It's going to be 5 years. So what are the effects then on British society of us having such strict laws and having had them for so long? So gun crime is very, very rare in this country. In 2015-16, there were about 8,000 offences involving a firearm, which might sound like quite a lot, but the vast majority of those actually were imitation firearms, which has become a bit of an issue. And we passed a law a while ago about imitation firearms. So people robbing banks with pretend guns, or in fact having replica weapons, which they then convert so they can actually fire, which apparently you can do. So, but we have actually tightened up the law on that quite recently. So woundings are very rare. And there are between 20 and 50 fatal shootings in the UK each year. Now, bear in mind, we have a population of 70 million. 2014-15 was our best year. There were actually 19 gun-related killings in the country in that year. And do bear in mind, we do consider that's not good enough. There are too many. And there are problems with gang violence. Some gangs have guns going on, so the occasional drive-by shooting. But also you can see the sort of scale of it, really. And since 1997, we've only had one other mass shooting, which was in 2010, when Derek Bird killed 12 people in Cumbria using a legally purchased rifle and shotgun. Now, the interesting thing about that one was that he spent most of the day wandering around Cumbria just shooting people at random. And I remember there was a huge police hunt and everyone was told to stay indoors and while they tried to find him. And he still only managed to kill 12 people. And the reason for that is that it's very difficult to kill people with shotguns, to kill large numbers of people with shotguns and rifles, because they're not the kind of weapons that allow you to do that. Following that, there weren't actually any new laws passed, but they did actually amend existing regulations around who was allowed to have guns. And strengthen it up. So if you want to own a gun, you need to get a license. To get a license from the police, the police have to give you a license. You need 2 referees who must be upstanding members of the citizen, upstanding members of society, so magistrates or doctors or judges, that kind of thing. And also there are rigorous background checks carried out. So obviously anybody who's been convicted of any crime can't own a gun. Anybody who has any history of mental illness isn't allowed to own a gun. And sort of basically anyone, if they smell a problem, if they think you've got even the slightest intention of using your gun for something nefarious, they just won't give you one. And they don't need to. They don't have to give you a reason. They can just decide not to. And they do turn down a lot of these. So the change in 2010 was that it was now they would no longer give licenses to anybody who's had even a suspended sentence. So anybody who's committed even minor crimes isn't allowed to own a license. And there you go. So that's the history of gun violence in the UK. And
in exchange, you have orders of magnitude fewer people.
Yes, absolutely.
So I remember when I first got here, there was in the news, a cop got shot.
Yeah.
And I was like, who is he? Why is this in the news? And you're like, it's a cop. He got shot.
I know.
And I thought, but it's a cop. Of course, that's what happens.
Our police are famously unarmed. And people think that makes them vulnerable. But actually, another interesting statistic is that between 2000 and 2011, there were 3 police officers who were shot and killed in the UK. So that's in 11 years. We have 3 police officers killed.
Wow.
Now, there have been a few more since then, but that's mainly terrorist related. Yeah, it is just simply because people don't have guns. It's just not worth the while for criminals to have guns.
And I'm guessing that, you guys aren't gunning down people of color in the street with a badge on because you don't have access to that. So
yeah, it happens occasionally, but again, it's a huge issue. Like we shot this Brazilian guy after the terrorist attack on the tube some years back. The police went a bit panicky and they shot some Brazilian guy. But yeah, it's very, very rare.
How do they shoot him if they aren't armed? What did they get?
That was the terrorism response unit.
Yes. So every area has what's called an ARV, an armed response vehicle. So it's a vehicle with 2 police officers and shotguns and actually machine guns and pistols as well. And they drive around. And then if there's anything where they suspect there's any kind of violent activity, they call on the ARV who come along and deal with it. But then obviously there are specialist terrorist response units around, and this was that response unit. This guy was wrongly thought to be involved in the terrorist attack. Then they bungled trying to arrest him in his house and end up following him into the tube, where they boarded a tube train with him. And even though he was completely unarmed, he was a Brazilian tourist. They then shot him about 10 times in the head. It was all very nasty. And no one's ever been convicted of that, actually. It's terrible. But yeah, but those kind of things are really, really rare, so they stand out because they're so rare.
So that's what we're shooting for, guys. We can
get it. Did you get it? Oh, I'm sorry. I have to lighten things a little bit here.
Yeah. So that's what this is what a sensible country would do. So we're not going to go that far, but if we can get it from tens of thousands to like hundreds.
Yep.
Now I have a question here, and I'm not sure if y'all are have this answer ready, but the NRA, is there an equivalent of that in other countries?
No.
Yeah.
Well, there also isn't the equivalent of the lobbying power that such organisations can wield either. And no, though, I mean, we have organisations about people who go shooting guns and things, but they're like hobby organisations. They're certainly not lobbyists.
Right.
And I don't dream of lobbying for not having gun control. I mean, it's just something that's completely inexplicable to anyone who doesn't live in America. There's such an organisation that is so patently evil could possibly have any kind of influence over politicians, and that's how it's viewed outside, because you look at the deaths and then you look at these people saying, no, everyone needs to keep their guns, because it's just such a simple fact to everyone else that if you take away people's guns, then they won't use them to kill people. It's something that's quite inexplicable. Now, you need a sort of fairly deep understanding, I think, of American society and culture to understand why guns are so important. But the thing about culture is it can change, but it doesn't change by itself generally. It changes when people push it. Mm-hmm. So culture's changed on smoking and driving drunk and all sorts of different things. And it's about time that you start to change your culture on guns as well. And it's going to be a really, really long battle, but you need to start that battle. And it just seems to not even started despite decades and decades and decades of carnage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now's the time.
Yeah.
It is.
Agreed. Long past.
Can I interject one more thing? I have a great article that I came across on what bullets do to bodies, about the damage that bullets actually have on bodies. So think about not just dead, think about the wounded. And this is an article written interviewing an emergency room doctor in Pennsylvania. So Natasha, I'm going to go ahead and post this in response to today's call on Facebook for the call so other people can see it.
Sure.
I personally think that the people who are making rules about gun control or lack thereof should be exposed to the visuals of exactly what bullets do to bodies. I think it needs to be really real.
I think that would have an impact. I really do. I think that it's a cruel and unusual idea thing to do to somebody. But yeah, if you're going to decide that.
If you're in the position where you can make these kinds of decisions, then you're in the position where you need to take responsibility for really looking at the situation. And that's going to be uncomfortable and ugly.
Right. You look at law enforcement that has to solve really difficult cases. They have to look at images and hear things that are absolutely horrifying. And thankfully, there's somebody out there that does that. And I hold our representatives to the same level.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
I like it.
All right. So who wants to make the first call today?
I'm all fired up. So I am calling Michael Bennet, my Democratic senator, who has sometimes voted the right way and sometimes voted like he's sort of yes and no. So he helped with the filibuster, if you remember, after the Pulse nightclub shooting, when they filibustered and said we're not doing anything else till we get gun control. So he joined that, but then he voted against some other stuff. That seems like common sense to me. So, but I'm in Colorado, where our gun culture is fairly strong, stronger than our liberal. Oh.
Hello, you reached office of Sarah Michael Bennet. How may I help you?
Hello, I'm so happy to talk to you. My name is Karen, and I am calling with an opinion, if that's okay.
Okay, yes, go ahead, ma'am.
Excellent. So I'm a voter from Denver, 80203.
Okay.
And I'm calling about gun control, which is probably no surprise today.
No.
I appreciate the senator's actions after the Orlando Pulse shooting. I felt like he stood up, and I would like to see an even stronger stand now. I'm hoping he'll oppose Senate Bill 446, the Constitutional Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act. Do you know where he stands on that?
That's a good question. So you may not be happy with the statement, but no statements have been made yet.
Okay, fair enough. But hopefully he'll think about, this is the wrong time to make it easier. I would also like to see the gag rule that was put in place with the 96 Dickey Amendment, preventing research by the CDC into gun violence. I'd like to see that lifted. If we could do that in the next budget, because we desperately need new policy, and solid research is going to be an important part of that process. So let's get that going again. That would be a start. Obviously, I'd really like to see a national semi-automatic weapon ban, as strong as the fully automatic weapon ban. That might be too big a step, but let's get started. Let's do something.
Okay. I will pass this along to the senator. Is there anything else I can do for you, ma'am?
No, but you can save lives. Make it happen.
We'll try, ma'am. We will try.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for calling the office of Senator Michael Bennet.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Aw.
Nice.
He had the voice of somebody who was really not wanting to take that call. And then by the end, he was like, you know what? This is a reasonable lady asking for reasonable things. This isn't so bad.
Done it.
Do you think let's try him around?
I think you have.
I did, yeah. No, maybe.
I reckon that was actually the senator. Who was just
It didn't sound like him.
Yeah, he's putting on a voice.
But
No, you've definitely convinced him.
but it's a suggestion, and I gave him something they could do, like take the Dickie Act out of the next budget. All right, who's next? Obviously, he's not calling.
I'll go
next.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Cheryl.
I will. And I'm going to start out. So I want to call my Democratic representative, Claire McCaskill, first, who, as we checked before the call, has an F rating with the NRA. And I heard that I'm very happy with her representation on a lot of points. After the broadcast today, I will also call my other representative who gets an A rating with the NRA, but I will take that one offline. Okay, let's see. I will be just as nice on both of them, I promise, because I'm not the person answering the phone that needs a whole lot of attitude.
Sometimes you do take a certain tone of moral authority, which is justified.
I do, or we do?
Yeah, you sound quite sure that you in what you're saying.
McCaskill's office, how can I help you?
Hi there. My name is Cheryl Pryor. I'm a constituent from St. Louis, and I would like to call and express some opinions on gun control, which I imagine is a pretty popular topic at the moment.
Yep, you're correct. I've received plenty of calls about it today.
I bet you have. Do you need my zip code? Do you need any other information? My zip code is 63126.
Okay, and what would you like me to pass along?
Well, I would love Senator McCaskill's help for our entire country on anything related to gun control. A few options are instituting universal background checks for ammo and gun buyers. Apparently, there are 80% of gun owners that support this, which is pretty awesome. We also need to allow the CDC to research gun violence prevention, which they've not been allowed to do because of the Dickie Rider. And I'd like to see the loophole closed that lets people buy guns at shows and through private sellers without background checks.
Yeah. And that is definitely something that all those things are things that she also supports as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for recording my thoughts, my opinions, and have a great day.
Thank you. You as well.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You both got actual people. If I don't get a person, I'm going to feel really left out.
You usually do, Cheryl. It's true.
Yeah.
Your lady hires well.
I never do.
Yeah, no. My Republican and your Republican just hire an answering machine.
Okay.
Who are you going to call? Are you going to try Cornyn, or who are you going to call?
Cornyn, baby.
The belly of the beast.
Let's do this.
I admire the chutzpah.
Senator John Cornyn, thanks for calling my
Look at that. It didn't even ring.
Pretending.
Locations and operating hours, please press 1. To leave a comment regarding current issues of interest, please press 2. If you'd like to speak, I appreciate you taking the time to make your views known on current policy issues of interest to you. Please leave your comment as well as your local zip code after the tone. Thank you and have a great day.
Hi, my name is Natasha Kingston. I'm a constituent from Denison, Texas, zip code 75020. I'm calling to ask Senator Cornyn to urge him to please change his position on gun control. I was deeply disappointed and embarrassed to find out that my senator was a sponsor of the Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act. It would allow gun owners to carry firearms over state borders and override federal restrictions on carrying a gun in a school zone and in federally owned public areas, which is frankly baffling to me that anyone would support this. And it being my senator who sponsors it is just so deeply upsetting. After what happened in Las Vegas, I think it's very clear America has an enormous problem, and the assumptions that if someone can't get a hold of a gun, that they will find a different way to commit a crime and have the same effect are not borne out by any of the other countries who have enacted gun control. And I feel like it's really time that we started to face facts and look at the actual evidence in front of us, because there are many examples to choose from where this has been done successfully. So I really would appreciate if you would consider closing the loophole that lets people buy guns at shows and through private sellers without background checks, that you would institute universal background checks for ammo and gun buyers, which is, by the way, a measure 80% of gun owners actually support. Remove the Dickey Rider from the budget and allow the CDC to research gun violence prevention, because this is something that deserves attention and deserves funding. And fund evidence-based community anti-violence programs like Ceasefire. Oh, look it, they cut me off.
I think they could fill in the rest.
Did they completely cut me off, or did they just say that you only have 1 minute of recording time?
To send your message, press 1.
Oh.
To send your message as urgent, press 2.
To send your message as urgent, press 2. Done.
Nice.
It's so urgent. It is.
It
It's an
is.
urgent
Is
one.
there anything more urgent than that right now?
Right.
I mean, obviously helping Puerto Rico. Yeah,
Hmm.
and that. Well, there's a lot, actually, now I think about the whole nuclear war situation.
I just
Still.
really, I don't get a person and I get cut off by the machine.
Yeah.
How insulting.
Well,
Hmm.
yeah, he wrote the bill.
Yep.
But it's a good try, and he needs to hear from both sides. He can't just hear from his lobbyists and his donors. Like, he's got to hear from his constituents.
I just can't, he's literally, it's like a cartoon where there's a man standing there holding out a bag full of money, and then there's a pile of bloody dead bodies. And he's just choosing the bag of money. It's really, it doesn't get much simpler than that. It just doesn't get much more shameful than that either.
He takes the NRA's coin.
Oh, yeah. Big time. I'm sure. Yeah. I'm sure that Texas is one of the biggest states for NRA campaign contributions.
So I'd like to point out that none other than Ronald Reagan signed our last major thing, which was banning machine guns.
Wow.
Just throwing that out there in 1986. He's the one who signed that into law. That's why we don't have fully automatic weapons. So it's not, you don't have to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
You can limit some things in a sensible way.
Yeah.
All right. We've done good work.
Yay.
Yay. Feels good to do something. So
It does, even though in a way that made me even more angry than before. But
But just think back on Cheryl's call.
The one thing that gives me comfort is that I could press 2 to send as urgent. So that's something.
No, I'm saying that's probably a placebo. I'm guessing they all end up in the same place.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Natasha, sometimes I wonder if they don't already have a system that recognizes your phone number and they just push you over to the voicemail.
I need to get some sort of spoofing system going from an app.
Call him and thank him for doing the Anti-Trafficking Act one.
Oh, yeah, true.
So it's not like you're always...
Yeah, occasionally he falls on the right side of things. And I wanted to let y'all know, too, that Brianna Beecher was in the chat. And she said, such an interesting episode. Glad the International Man of Mystery joined. So we got some thumbs up in the audience there.
Hi, Brianna. Hope you're good. All right.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me and doing this one today. I agree. I think it really was an interesting episode, and I definitely learned a lot. So it's always nice when that happens.
Pleasure. All right. Next week, we've got another special guest. It'll be great.
Woohoo!
Ooh, bye.
Bye.
Bye.